For everyone at home who doesn't know you, could you introduce yourself, David?
Sure, yeah, I'm David Thompson. I'm one of the co-founders of Spirit of Yorkshire and the MD. So I run everything from staffing all the way through to production and final bottling with my team.
All right, and with how many people are you working currently in Yorkshire?
So in the Spirit of Yorkshire now we have a team of 23 people. We also have a visitor centre and a coffee shop as well, so quite a few people are employed on that side. And in production at the moment we have about five people, with my whisky director, the sixth, which he works very hard to put all the bottlings together, and he's called Joe Clark.
Could you guide us, bring us back to the beginning, when did this idea of building a distillery in Yorkshire, when did it start?
Yeah, it's pretty crazy really, because Yorkshire as a county is the biggest county in England. So we have over 5.5 million people living in Yorkshire, which actually is more than all the people living in Scotland. So it is quite bizarre that we haven't actually had a whisky distillery in Yorkshire before. And more so because we grow a huge amount of malting barley in this actual area. So one of probably the biggest malting barley suppliers to Scotland to obviously make their whisky. And our whole story starts as farmers. So my business partner Tom Mellor is a third generation barley farmer, and basically the story started when he decided he wanted to make more than just malting barley but wanted to make beer and whisky, and started way back in 2003 making beer. The brand is called Walt Top, and that has gone forward to be a very successful brand throughout Europe and the UK. And then in 2014 we started the conversation about making whisky from, I guess, that knowledge of making really high quality beer. So clearly we knew how to make a wash, we just needed to make it slightly different to the beer that he'd been making for many years.
And if you look now at this, do you feel like this basis in beer really was a big advantage, or was it more like there were a big difference between brewing a nice beer and distilling a nice whiskey?
Well, actually, there isn't a great deal of difference, and I think that's what surprised us. Obviously, beer is going through extra processing, so it's actually boiling the wort with hops to add flavour, and effectively you're missing that whole section out when you're making a wash. Apart from that, pretty much the process is the same. We do use different yeast strains for making the wash, because what we're trying to do is drive esters and flavour into the wash right from day one. So the two strains of yeast are designed first of all for making as much alcohol as we can, but secondly for driving the flavour profile. So apart from that, really, fundamentally it's the same sort of process. We have a slightly longer fermentation time, so we're looking particularly around the 70 plus hours for wash, where it's probably close to half that for beer. So fundamentally it's the same with subtle differences.
If we take a quick look at the beer side of things, is it now still a lot of beer you produce, or is it mostly whiskey currently?
It's about half and half. So the way to think about this is we've got 600 acres of arable land growing malting barley, of which, the farm is 600 acres, of which 300 acres is growing malting barley. Half of it goes to make beer and half of it goes to make wash for distilling. So we're splitting the production in pretty much in half, which I think at the moment we're just going towards making more whisky than we are beer, but that's a natural growth of a brand now. It's sort of coming on to 6-7 years old.
If we take a look at your history, do you remember your first introduction into whiskey?
Yeah, I think for me the story starts a little bit before that, because I'm agriculturally trained as well. So I met Tom, my business partner, because I was selling him the seed to grow his malting barley way back in 88, 89. So a long time ago I was involved in crop production and crop science, and particularly malting barley, with this area being really well known for malting barley growing. So if you like, I come from that side, and we decided, when we met and he was making the beer and I was doing all sorts of other things in agriculture, that it was a logical sort of stepped to make the whisky in 2014-15. So we employed Dr. Jim Swan, who I guess most of your listeners and viewers will recognise as being extremely influential in new distillery setups. Some of the brands out there he's been involved in Milk and Honey from Israel, Kavalan, Taiwanese whiskey, Penderyn. All these brands have had the Jim Swan effect. And he worked with us in the early days because clearly we knew how to make beer, but we needed that expertise of how to distill it into whiskey.
You are distilling yourself, or did you look to find the perfect master distiller for the Spirit of Yorkshire? How did this whole thing came to be?
Yeah, it's a great...
I hear some laughing.
Oh,
it's a funny story? Or?
No, it's an interesting story because the amount of times we've been asked that, and with us being Yorkshire people, I mean, we're very much of the mind that we want to try and do things ourselves. We do respect the traditional way of making whiskey. There's no question we're trying to reinvent the wheel. Why would we? But we wanted to be able to actually impart ourselves into the spirit we made. So Tom and I actually worked with Jim for well over a year without any other employees on site, without employing a master distiller with perhaps preconceived ideas of how you make whiskey. We just wanted to learn by, yes, our mistakes, but also from the master himself. So I smile because I can remember those days fondly working with Jim, and his expertise was just phenomenal. And I'm so pleased Tom and I did that because we've been able to pass on that passion that Jim had onto our distillers now. So we don't distill anymore. After saying that, I did spend 9 months during COVID back on the stills. so with that base skill, if you like, it made the business very, very flexible, and we were able to get through sort of obviously a very difficult time for everyone.
And we hear the term from grain to glass quite often. If I take a look at you coming from this seed selling background, this must be especially true for you guys?
Yeah, actually, we don't use the word grain to glass because if you think about it, everybody is grain to glass. They are starting with a barley or a wheat and they're making whiskey. What we call it is field to bottle because we're actually planting the seed in the ground. We're actually nurturing that crop all the way through its growing process. But what we've also done, and because we can, we're trying to look after the soil, and that sounds like a very glib sort of word. We're trying to look after the soil, but there's a lot of evidence out there to say if we don't change the way we farm, we're not going to have soil to grow crops in the next 60, 70 years. And that's through mechanical movement of or tilling, if you like, of the soil. You break the structure, you make it into almost like a dust bowl. I guess everybody's heard of the dust bowls of America. And that's all started by over cultivation. So what we've done over the last 3 or 4 years is cut out tilling completely, and we just direct drill the crop straight back into the seed bed from the previous year. Now that has a double-fold effect. It's very good for the soil and the structure and the worm population and the organic matter, but also it's very good because we're not actually releasing carbon to the atmosphere. So when everybody talks about sustainability, if we don't actually have soil, nothing else is sustainable from there forward. So we really can go right back to that land and the soil and put the emphasis on looking after it for future generations.
And I've been visiting a distillery a while ago in Belgium, who also farm their own lands, and they also explained to me that it's not very good for the soil to grow the same grains or products, vegetables, whatever, on the same soil continuously. Is it something that you also keep in mind? Because you said you had 600 acres, and is it you guys switch it up also?
Sure, yeah. I mean, the term we use is rotation. So what you need within any good crop management is good rotation. And one of the things we've adopted with the no-till is, if you think about malting barley, it's sort of harvested in the late summer. Traditionally, you would then plough the land and wait until the spring to sow the next crop. And what you would have is a bare field. So what we do is, instead of ploughing, we actually sow a cover crop straight back into that field. And that will grow through the winter or autumn, through the winter and into the spring. And those plants are doing some fantastic things to the soil structure, as I said. It's like a green manure as well. It's adding organic matter back into the soil. It's adding natural nitrogen, so clovers fix natural nitrogen back into the soil. And then we've got all sorts of buckwheats and all sorts of lovely things doing great things for the soil. So if you like, that's a mini break. That is breaking up the pattern of barley, barley, barley. On top of that, obviously we rotate out barley, so we might have wheat, we might have oilseed rape to break up that cropping as well. But it's absolutely fundamental to good health of the plant and the good health of the soil to have a good break system.
And this results in good grains, I can imagine.
It results in very good grains, and what we've seen actually when we first started the no-till and direct drilling, we did see a slight drop-off of yield. Now that doesn't mean quality; it just is the amount of grains you produce. And the soil was recovering; it was getting picking back up the sort of natural organic matter, and it was becoming healthier. And now what we're seeing is a rise in yields and a very, very healthy crop with some fantastic yields. So you have to go through a little bit of pain to get to this point, but we felt that was definitely the right thing to do for the future.
So we have some good quality grains. I imagine that pretty much everything is done by you guys in the distillery. Like also, like if we take a look at malting, how do you guys do malting?
Right, well that's the only thing actually we don't do, Max, on the actual site. So as I explained, the Yorkshire Wolds, which is the rolling land that we have here, is superbly light and very free draining, so it's fantastic for malting barley production. So actually we have some of the biggest malting businesses just on our doorstep. Because of that, it's a catchment area for all that lovely barley. So we do actually have a relationship with a company called Muntons down the road, and literally it is 10 miles down the road. So we ring fence our crop for our harvest. It goes down there, it's batch malted, so it comes back to us as one big batch, and then we don't get any variation throughout the year. And I think if you are malting your own, it's not an exact science, particularly if it's floor malted, and you will get natural variations in how it malts throughout the season. So we feel absolutely. So we believe that flavour is choice driven, not and by the way you distill and by the cask you use and so on, but the actual, we see it as a canvas. So our barley is always the same. So we've got that lovely canvas to build the flavour profile on top of.
All right, and then we start like making the wash, fermenting. You also mentioned that you take a very long time to ferment. For everyone at home who doesn't know exactly why, what is the reason behind this?
Basically, if you're fermenting over a longer period of time, there's different yeasts are getting involved. There's sort of anaerobic fermentation as well. So the longer you go, the more profile or flavour profile, the deeper the flavour profile you produce. So, if it's short and sweet, you'll only get the same thing every time. But with what we're trying to do is create that lovely sort of anaerobic fermentation at the end of the process, which is adding something that's quite unique to a long fermented product. So, we found that the best way, and it really is driving some fantastic esters into that wash.
For everyone at home who's watching the episode, they can see the still right behind you. Can you explain a little bit about it? Because I can see like a column piece and a pot still piece, and like, what still do you guys use? Yeah, exactly.
Well, right back when we started the conversation, we're talking about Jim Swan and the fact that we really, really respect traditional ways of making whiskey. And of course, the traditional way is using two pots, and we do that. And the one you can't see just out of camera, which is our 5,000 litre wash still. This one, which I think you can just see, is our 3,500 litre spirit still. Now they're full-size stills, made in Scotland in the traditional way, and 6 months of the year, that's exactly what they do. They run in tandem, and we make a very traditional new make spirit, quite oily, quite heavy, quite flavoursome. And then 6 months of the year, we've got this column that you can see behind me, which we divert the spirit from the spirit still through the extra copper of the column. So we don't really call it a column still, we call it a rectifying column. So effectively it's just it's making that vapour work harder, hitting more copper, making it lighter, making it fruitier, and we're in a unique position, Max, where we end up with 2 styles of new make spirit, which is pretty unusual, certainly for Scotland, as I don't think you can run this sort of system in Scotland. But the beauty of being in England is that we can actually have a little bit more flexibility and innovate a little bit on the way that we make our spirit. So we cask those completely separately, and then when we bring them back to the bottle, we have another sort of tool in our box of being able to bring a bigger proportion of one or the other, depending on what sort of product we're trying to make at the end. Yeah.
I was wondering, like, for everyone at home, if we produce in Scotland a single malt, it must be completely distilled in copper pot stills, meaning like doing this whole process, you can't call it a single malt, and it automatically will be called a single grain, which, yeah, it doesn't have the same ring to it, to say the least. But you cask it completely separate. Do you also vary? Like, do you say like, okay, we experienced that this more lighter and fruitier spirit comes way better to the front if we age it in bourbon barrels or in STR cask? Or do you say like, let's do basically everything?
Okay, well, you're absolutely right. And just to quickly rewind to what you said, a batch system is a pot system, and that's single malt production in Scotland. There are sort of variants of stills with like a column or an extra bit of column on top of a pot. Now that still is single malt production in Scotland, and this is still a batch system. So typically a column, if you talk about column stills, would be a continuous system.
But how do you pick and choose which spirit you want to age in with which cask, or do you just try everything?
No, we do try and match the spirit style with the cask type. Obviously the lighter, fruitier style of new make we tend to mature in bourbon, because that's a very good balanced sort of spirit. It's not been hidden by a very heavy sherry cask, for example. Whereas the heavier and the more oily, more traditional perhaps new make lends itself a lot better to going into a heavier cask.
So it's, you guys plan this out, or is it just also like a little bit of luck?
I think it was part of the plan, because when we talked to Jim about this, you know, he was a master of maturation. There's no question about that, and actually one of the casks he's so well known for is the STR, but we'll go on to that. But he very much was of the belief that he was wanting and willing to try anything new, which he felt would work, and the column and the pot distillate together he was very excited about, because he'd never done that before, and for him it was a challenge. Also trying the different cask types or the different spirit types as well was a challenge. So I think, like anything, when you set this up, you can respect that traditional way of doing things, but there's no point in just replicating what's already out there. And I think that's the exciting thing about setting the distillery up. You can try these things without really being too outrageous, you know, not pushing the boundaries too far, because the bottom line is, you know, it's got to be drinkable, it's got to be lovely, it's got to be a good whiskey, but also it has to be different.
We've been talking a lot about whiskey in general and about how you guys produce it, but yeah, I figured out that, like, talking about whiskey without whiskey in a glass, it's always not quite the same, right? So we discussed this, and we chose the Filey Bay STR Cask. I think that you can explain, as the best guy here, who what STR means, because
sure, yeah,
I know about like sherry casks and port casks, but I don't know about a drink called STR or anything like that.
Absolutely, and I think again it's rewinding the clock back to when we first started in sort of 2016, 15, 16. Generally speaking, there was a real shortage of wood, and that all started from Canada and some really bad harvests, oak harvests up there. So with the shortage of wood, we had to sort of try and find things that were perhaps in abundance but weren't typically used. And this is where, again, Jim Swan comes in, because he he knew there was an awful lot of red wine casks that had been out there, which typically you wouldn't use because you'd be getting the red colour and you'd be getting the tannins and all the bits and pieces of actually the wine that you don't want in whiskey. So he developed a system of shaving, toasting and recharring the inside of the cask, STR. That's where it comes from. Yeah. So, and what that does is taking out that sort of redness and that tannin element of the cask, but it's exposing new oak, and it's also giving the ability to energize that cask by toasting and recharring. So effectively, it was something that came out of necessity. But what we found was it was adding some fantastic, deep, lovely flavours that perhaps you wouldn't get from a typical sherry cask or a bourbon cask that was very different, but very complementary to the type of spirit we were definitely making and a lot of newer distillers are making. So that's the background to an STR, and it can be any red wine cask. It just happens that ours are Spanish Rioja. There's a multitude of different variants of that, and that's what makes it exciting. It's not just all about it being red wine, it's about which red wine and where it's from.
I'm just going to ask you if you want to guide me through a quick nosing and tasting of the whiskey itself, if you don't mind.
No, absolutely. I think a lot of tasting and nosing of any whiskey is very subjective, so this is my take on what we've got in front of us, which is the STR Cask from Spirit of Yorkshire. And for me, it noses, I think first of all you get a really light, sort of fragrant nose from it. Perhaps not straight away sort of a red wine feel to it. It's sort of very much a finish, so it's obviously had a lot of time in bourbon first, and you get that sort of that bourbon background, you get that lightness, you get that fruitiness, you get you get the vanilla that you would typically get from bourbon casks. So that inherent sort of fruitiness and lightness is there right on the nose, and then you're starting to pick up sort of the deeper sort of nose of the red wine and the depth of the spirit.
It has on the first nose, it really has this more, I would almost say like this earthy, fresh, like herbal and grassy notes to it as well.
Yeah, and I think that's the new make spirit coming out. You know, it is a very light, sort of grassy, sort of, you're dead right, nose and flavour. So, yeah, you definitely pick that up. I also get with the nose, definitely the back end of it, sort of there's like a chocolatey, sort of deeper sort of flavour as well. So it's sort of really well balanced in the nose, sort of from front to back. So
almost like this almost this hot chocolate, this cacao note to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the other thing that's sort of sitting right in the middle of that nose is the red berries. You know, the grapey red berries, sort of almost autumn fruits. So yeah, maybe a bit of blackcurrant and that sort of thing going on in there as well.
All right, I'm really looking forward to try it. David, thank you so much for joining us, and cheers.
No problem. Cheers. Yeah, I recognise that. I think when you've tasted a lot of whiskies and increasingly your own, you always get comfort from going back to ones that you sort of haven't perhaps tasted for a while. And when I say for a while, it might be a couple of months that I haven't had this past my lips, but it's sort of like a big comfort blanket. It's one that you would probably sit in front of a fire with and really enjoy the depth of flavour.
Yeah, this fire, this almost like going towards Christmas, this very nice warm flavor.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not a sherry flavour. You know, we must. You know, it looks in the glass. It's sort of looking quite sort of dark, and in the bottle it certainly does. But it's not that sherry sort of flavour at all. It's very much lighter than that and much more I would say lighter and fruitier perhaps than a sherry. So that's what really the slot it fits in, you know, between the really light bourbon right the way through to the heavy sherry. It's sort of fitting into that lovely slot in the middle, which is really accessible whiskey for people who perhaps don't particularly like the sherry bombs, want a bit more from it than just the bourbon maturation, and this is bang on.
And you say it's like an STR finish. Can you tell us a bit more? Like it's Spanish Rioja casks, but can you also like how long do you guys finish, or is that a trade secret?
Well, not really. So yeah, we do these in batches. We do them in batches of 6,000 bottles. So that's a starting place. So what we're doing with this is we've got our bourbon casks, which are sourced directly from Brown-Forman, and we typically 4.5 years first maturation in these casks, and then we jump it into the STR cask, which has just arrived, so we don't hang about. They're straight into a lovely wet cask from our supplier, and typically we don't tend to go by a set in stone time, because every cask is different and every season is different, so it depends on the time of year you're filling them. So typically it could be anything from 6 months right the way through to probably 9, even 12 months. But the important thing with finishing anything is that you're testing it all the time, because you can certainly get sampling all the time, because you can overpower it by leaving it too long, and likewise you can underdo it by getting it out too quickly.
I can imagine that this is a very hard and difficult job.
Incredibly hard, but somebody's got to do it, Max. You know.
Yeah, it's such a like. If you need any volunteers, I can show you. No, but but how do you guys like? Do you sample weekly? Is it that you guys with the whole team walk through the warehouse and sample every cask?
Yeah. Well, interestingly enough, I mean, not everybody's good at sampling and tasting. So, you know, bizarrely enough, you know, a lot of ladies out there are very, very good at it. We actually have my whiskey director, Joe, and what he does, he does the sort of weekly, fortnightly sampling. He will then bring those down to the distillery. He will then, I will do a blind tasting with him. We compare notes, and then we'll put it around the team and compare notes. So it's very much a team effort, and so far Joe and I have been able to select the same sort of casks independently of each other. You know, the variance is very, very rare, and then it's just backed up by the rest of the team sort of saying, yeah, I agree, or no, I don't. So it's a team process, and we really enjoy that sort of element of doing it.
And if you like, okay, we now have the STR cask in front of us. This isn't your only whiskey expression, I can imagine. You have the flagship.
I have a flagship bottle here. So the beauty of the flagship is that is the 4.5 to 5 year maturation in bourbon. So if you like, this is the template for every other finish we do. So this liquid will jump out of the bourbon cask and into an STR for the STR finish. We also have a muscatel finish, which is quite an unusual cask. We have a peated finish where we're using an ex-Islay cask. And with the chat about the brewery at the beginning, we also have some really great collaborations with our brewery, our sister company, where we're doing an IPA finish. So a lovely IPA beer jumping into a cask, back out, and then finishing our whiskey with a fantastic IPA finish.
And if we're talking about like transparency, like you mentioned, like the STR cask, it's from Spain. The IPA cask is from like the brewery side of things. Do you guys share all these things on the website, or do you need to call for a podcast interview to get to the bottom of it?
We're very open. You know, what we want to do is share what we do, and everything like this is definitely on the website. So you know, jump on there, have a look. If you have definitely got more questions, then certainly drop us an email. But the best way to actually keep up to date is actually sign up to our newsletter, and you'll get all the up to date information on.
If you decide to make a new expression, we have the flagship, which is basically exactly what it says on the tin. But if you want to make a new expression, do you start off with a cask or with an idea, or how does this whole plan comes to be?
Interesting, really, because I think it really starts with, we know the base spirit is good, so we're happy with how we're making the actual new make. So what excites us, and what I guess the next process is what casks are out there also excite us. Not just because they're different or unusual, but because they're really going to add something very, very interesting to our core range, if you like. So with that in mind, we're looking at other beer finishes, with the brewery, we're working very heavily with them. There's been quite a number of sort of stout type finishes. Well, actually, we've got one coming forward, which is a marmalade porter finish, which again is incredibly unusual, yeah. But we've had our noses in there, and we're really happy the way things are developing with that. A bit weird, but actually very, very exciting and very flavoursome.
All right, and do you like the peated finish on ex-Isla casks? Can you share like from which distillery the casks are from?
It's something we don't actually share openly, but as part of the sort of agreement we've got. But fundamentally, they've got the same principles as us. So if you're thinking about field to bottle, then I'm sure that narrows it down.
Yeah, it definitely brings it down to at least one or two. Cool. And if we take a quick look, there's a new like a beer finish coming on. What is like something which you would like to try? If you could do anything your heart desire, what would it be?
Wow, what a question. I think I'm doing it, to be honest with you.
That's even a better answer, to be honest.
Yeah, I do like the experimental side, but not just for the sake of it. As I say, it's got to really mean, it's got to be done for the right reasons, and that's to make a really flavoursome spirit and a flavoursome drink. So yeah, we're just open to trying new things. I mean, we have actually grown last couple of years at a field of rye, so that was always one of my little things I would like to have tried was our own rye whisky from Yorkshire as well. So okay, it might be a couple of years away, but we've used 51% rye and the rest malting barley, and also in brand new virgin oak casks, which is obviously the traditional way of making a rye whisky. The other really exciting one was, and this is almost like reverse engineering, was that we took our flagship, which was ex-bourbon, matured for 4.5 years, and then we finished it in a brand new oak cask. So that really gave a fantastic lift of the bourbon character, if you like.
And this virgin cask gives way more of these woody notes to it?
Yeah, I mean, our spirit is very much spirit forward, and there's no question about that. We don't want to hide our base spirit from the wood. So when you do put something into a brand new oak cask, which is particularly active, you've got to be very careful not to overpower that sort of base spirit. So it was an experiment, but it was one that really worked well, and it got a Masters Award in the Spirit Business 2022. So I think there's only a very few handful of certainly English whiskies that got the Masters Award. So we were super delighted with that, and it just shows that if you're willing to try new things, there's an audience out there that wants to try it as well. And I think that, for me, is the most exciting part of making whiskey, that other people can enjoy what we've done.
I'm a guy who really likes to dive deeper inside of like small nitty-gritty things, like how wood maturation changes things and fermentation and stuff like that. And one of the things which I'm also quite interested in is like laws. And the Scottish whiskey laws are very, very extreme compared to European laws. Do you feel like it's a positive thing that you distill in England compared to Scotland?
Well, I think we've got to take our hats off to how the Scottish system has set very high standards for the production of single malt whisky. Without them, it would be probably a little bit like the Wild West, and maybe, dare I say, like the gin market, where there really aren't any rules. And I think that market has been really damaged without having structure. So there is no question that the SWA have done a fantastic job in protecting a very quality-led product. At the same time, you're absolutely right, it can be seen to be a little bit restrictive for the right reasons sometimes, but also I think for us, we adhere to pretty much all of what they suggest. And indeed, we do have the English Whisky Guild, which is just being set up at the moment to underpin what we believe are the quality aspects of making whisky and single malt whisky in England. So that's underway. It's gone to our DEFRA, our government body who underpin these things, and it's going through consultation at the moment. So we all believe we should have a very strong sort of structure to the way that the product is made and marketed. So you'll see that coming through in the next sort of few months, I'm absolutely certain. But at the same time, you know, that innovation, this column, and little things like we actually make our wash at the brewery, which is not on this site, it's just 2 miles up the road on the farm. You couldn't do that in Scotland because they have the rule it has to be mashed, distilled and brewed and distilled and fermented all on one site. So things like that don't make a lot of sense in terms of quality. It just makes that's more historical, if you like. So I think we can explore different things, but as I say, we definitely respect tradition of how to make whiskey with a little bit of a Yorkshire twist.
And what is this Yorkshire twist? Like, what makes the Spirit of Yorkshire the Spirit of Yorkshire?
Yeah, well, it's the spirit of the people. I mean, on the bottom of our bottle it says proudly made of Yorkshire, you know, and of is the important word there. You know, it's of the people, it's of the land, it's of the area, it's of us, you know. And I think that's the Yorkshire people summed up. You know, we're very proud of our county, we're very proud of our area. You know, Filey Bay comes from the fact we're sitting on Filey Bay itself. We can see the sea from our distillery. The Gannet you can see on the bottle, you know, if you actually do buy one and get hold of one, it's very decorative. There's a lovely bird, which is the Gannet, which is literally situated down the road from us, a big Gannet colony. So all of these sort of aspects of the place and where we are and Yorkshire, if you like, is in that bottle. Even the glass bottle's made in Yorkshire. So, you know, we're really proud people, really proud.
And like I can imagine, like you mentioned, like a lot of people working at the distillery, but also the visitor center, so people can also visit the distillery. What can they expect? Is it like how does it also have this Yorkshire twist to it?
Well, you know, there's no pretense here. You know, we are what we are. So we actually have an industrial building. We're not a pretty sort of stone-built distillery in a glen in Scotland. You know, we are what we are. So on face value you might think, oh, okay, yeah, fine, it's on industrial estate, but when you get inside you will see what we've done. It's very warming, and it's very welcoming to all our overseas and local guests. And the beauty of being in Holland is you can jump on North Sea ferries from Rotterdam and you can be here overnight, and literally an hour away from Hull, that's where the distillery is. So very accessible for you guys to come and have a look, and you'll be very welcome.
I'm feeling a field trip coming up anytime soon. If this field trip is way too difficult, or you can't go to England currently, you guys also come to Holland anytime, like soon.
Sure, yeah. We're coming to The Hague, so we'll be at the International Whisky Show in The Hague, and I think that's just checking, it's the 18th, 19th and 20th of November. So we'll be there with our distributor on their stand, and I'd love to meet as many of you and chat about Spirit of Yorkshire and Filey Bay whisky in more detail.
I'm also there, so I'll be looking forward to meet you in person, and I'm inviting everyone at home to swing by. Try not only the Filey Bay STR Cask, but pretty much everything you guys have in store. Can you give us a little tease, for something to keep an eye out for, like a special release or anything which is coming up?
Yeah, I mean, we've talked pretty much about our core range, which is the finishing range, but we do obviously have single casks. So we have our Sherry Cask Reserve, which is a marriage of all sorts of different sherry casks. So this will be our third bottling of that. And from time to time, we've got one coming at the moment actually, which is our port finish. Now we haven't actually launched that yet, so that'll be a launch this autumn, just right for Christmas. So hopefully if we can get that over to Holland, that'll be available as well, if not direct from the distillery itself. So there's lots of exciting things going on in the background, a lot of experimental things as well. So yeah, it's looking bright.
I'm looking forward to it. David, I want to thank you so much for your time and chatting with us and the people at home. If people want to get in contact, they can subscribe to the newsmail. They can find it on the website.
Absolutely, yeah. So it's www.spiritofyorkshire.com. Sign up to the newsletter and yeah, you'll get all the first-hand information of what's coming up and what we're doing at the distillery.
Really cool. And also like the social media handles, people can find you on Instagram and Facebook at...
Yes, they can. It's just Spirit of Yorkshire. So yeah, search for that. I don't think there's any other Spirit of Yorkshire out there, so you'll see us on those sides, those platforms, and yeah, we're very active on that side as well. So it's quite entertaining.
Yeah, I've seen a few stories about the festivals and all the shows, so it's quite amusing to follow. I would highly recommend that. David, we'll see each other in The Hague, and thank you so much. And let's hope, let's toast to another amazing few bottlings.
Yeah, absolute pleasure, Max, and thanks for hosting us today. And I hope your listeners and viewers have enjoyed what we've done today.
Thank you so much. Cheers.